400 billion. That is how much the World Bank estimates could be needed to rebuild Ukraine. An eye-watering sum. And today, Ukraine's allies at a major conference in London did promise significant chunks of cash. Now, not just for the war effort, but for Ukraine's reconstruction. But with the conflict very much still raging and the counteroffensive to retake occupied territory just getting underway, is the time now right for a Marshall Plan for Ukraine? Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Nadia Massi in for Francois Picard this evening. Our guests on the show, the analyst Alexander Flipenko, who joins us from Vilnius in Lithuania. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Me.
Alexander Rodniansky is an economic advisor to Volodymyr Zelensky. He spent today at that conference in London. He joins us as well. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
And here in the studio with me is Georges Kuzmaninoch. He's the head of the French political party République Souveraine. Good to have you as well in the studio, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
So before we get to our conversation with our guests, here's a roundup then of the main news today from that conference in London, as told by Andrew Hillier.
It's a mammoth task, but Kyiv's allies have already pledged billions of dollars in aid at the Ukraine Recovery Conference. The goal? To help rebuild the country's infrastructure devastated by war. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he needed to see action, not just pledges.
At this conference, we must move from vision to agreements and from agreements to real projects. There is a Ukrainian delegation in London that will present concrete things that we propose to do together.
The US pledged more than $1.3 billion in aid, with $500 million earmarked for Ukraine's energy grid.
Recovery is about more than just ensuring people have what they need to survive. Food to eat, water to drink, medicine to take, heat in the winter, electricity in all seasons. Recovery is about laying the foundation for Ukraine to thrive as a secure, independent country, fully integrated with Europe, connected to markets around the world.
The EU also announced its own plan to provide Ukraine with $55 billion in support through to 2027, but that's still only a small portion of what will be needed to get the country back on its feet. The World Bank estimates that reconstruction will cost more than $400 billion, with political leaders urging private sector companies to invest. Rebuilding isn't the only aim. Donors have also insisted on the need for Ukraine to fight corruption to make it fit for EU membership one day in the future.
Well, let's go straight then to London on the programme. Bring in Alexander Rodniansk, who was at that conference today, who's an advisor to President Zelensky. First of all, sir, in terms of financial pledges, did you get what you were hoping for out of allied nations?
We are getting what we're hoping for over time. It's not going to come in one day. This is one of the key milestones, having these conferences, and this one in particular, in terms of the larger picture, in terms of the larger way that we have to surmount when it comes to our reconstruction, our recovery, the modernization of Ukraine more generally. And yes, I mean, the public sector has made some commitments. We've heard the statements from the leaders, but also the private sector has been present. And so the conference is still ongoing. There's panel discussions when it comes to various industries, and we're making our way there.
Indeed, there may well be more pledges tomorrow, but I'm interested just in the numbers for now, if I can, because the World Bank is estimating it could be up to 400 billion that is needed for Ukraine. But I wonder whether you actually think that that figure could be higher, because I understand that number was established before the destruction in Bakhmut. What do you think, sir?
Absolutely, and that's why I, on the one hand, think that it's important to talk about numbers, but on the other hand, I think it's somewhat misguided because the level of uncertainty is just so high, and the confidence intervals, if you want, around these estimates are just very wide. The number has certainly risen after March, since March, when the 411 billion estimate was made by the World Bank that you're referring to. Now we've had the disaster in Kakhovka, which had deleterious effects on the flora and fauna of the region. That's going to have devastating effects on the costs and the cost of rebuilding in particular, etc. So the war is ongoing, the war is raging on, and so these numbers are all set to rise. But as I said, the good news is, in some sense, we don't expect these numbers, and we don't have to have these numbers and these sums to come in overnight or even within 1 year. This is the stock of physical capital and just overall damage to the economy that will then have to be rebuilt over the course of the years through economic growth, essentially.
And your thoughts on that, Alexandra Flipenko, because we are very much still in the middle of the war in Ukraine, that counteroffensive just getting underway. So is it the right time to be talking about money for reconstruction, in your view?
Perfect time, and especially since President Putin and the Kremlin are so violent, and they were brutally destroying Ukraine, and we saw it from the first days. We saw this hatred towards a young, successful country, this fight between past and the future. And of course, I think that it is high time to talk about the reconstruction. Maybe we should have been talking about it even earlier, because Ukraine needs very much needs those finances and needs the security and stability. Me being in Lithuania, I am just 2 hours away from Belarus, from that place where the nuclear storage is going to be filled. Those nuclear warheads are supposed to be delivered. And I feel secure and safe only because I am in the European Union and Lithuania is part of NATO. This is what Ukraine needs, the security, first of all. And of course, the finances, the security and finances to rebuild, because Putin and Kremlin were so violent and so brutal, and they really wanted to destroy Ukraine, to wipe it from the face of the earth. And so this is a good time to show President Putin and the Kremlin that the world is with Ukraine when the counteroffensive is going on, and that people are thinking about the future rather than the past that the Kremlin is trying to drag everyone into.
Well, let's put that then to George Kuzmanovic, who's with me here in the studio. And sir, do you agree that this is the right time to be talking about reconstruction? Because I suppose there is a risk, isn't there, that, you know, these are areas that could be destroyed again. The fighting is very much going on. So should we be talking about reconstruction right now?
Yeah, war is going on. So before reconstruction, you need to end the war.
Yeah.
And you need or a victory of Ukraine, or a victory of Russia, or stopping the war and having a new border, and then you have reconstruction.
So it's not the right time in your view?
Well, war is going on. I mean, let's say if Ukraine succeed in this offensive, they will take other cities, there will be fight in more cities. If I understand, even Donetsk is under bombing. So more destructions, and Russians will fight back, so more destruction. So you don't know what has to be rebuilt in the future. I think it will be far more than what is expected right now.
And what about what Alexandra Flipenko just said there, that yes, today is a fundraising forum for Ukraine, but it's also about sending a message to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, that Ukraine's allies are in this for the long haul. They're sticking with Kyiv. Do you think Vladimir Putin is hearing that message?
I don't think so at all.
Why not?
He's doing what he wants to do. He doesn't care about this. I think this meeting. He wants to conquer more of Ukraine. And but I would like to emphasize one point. All the money that is sent to Ukraine, support, weapons, and this money for reconstruction are not gifts. It's loans, and it will be Ukraine will have to reimburse it at the end. Repaid it with assets, lands, mines, factories, business agreement with the West, especially with the United States. We've seen that many times, and there is another point that has to be emphasized, is that often we have all these nice meetings saying we will send money and rebuild Lebanon, Libya, Iraq, and at the end, often you get 10, 20, 30% of the money. So, and the war is still not over. So, really, it's too early to have any real figure about what will be needed for Ukraine at the end.
Let's put that question then to Alex.
On the other side, one other thing is, if the information are correct, Russia is rebuilding some part of Mariupol at the same time.
We'll come to that in a moment. Alexander Rodniant, if I can bring you back in as someone who's at that conference in London, what's your view on what we just heard? First of all, perhaps that the suggestion that that money pledged might not be honoured, and also that Russia's rebuilding Mariupol. Your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take it one step at a time. In terms of Russia rebuilding any of the cities, I mean, we haven't seen evidence of that. And in fact, they're not capable of doing that. They're not capable of even their own country. If you look at Russia itself, Moscow might look, some of the big cities might look more or less developed, but the rest of the country certainly does not. So whatever they do in Mariupol, and they haven't done much in Mariupol, it's really just about graft, corruption, and stealing money primarily for those who were interested in the war and for the Russian elites that were pushing for the war throughout this whole time. That's number one. Number two, as far as Ukraine is concerned, we're actually quite distinct by now. I mean, with all due respect, there's no comparison between whatever country you're thinking of and Ukraine. We've made a huge amount of progress when it comes to corruption. We've established 5 anti-corruption institutions, law enforcement agencies, prosecutor general offices just for corruption, a higher court to fight corruption and to prosecute corruption. All of these institutions are now working in tandem as one integrated system, and they're having success. We're seeing more and more cases of persecution, of people being put on trial, of corruption being punished, etc. So you might have the wrong impression that there's, corruption in Ukraine, but actually it's a good sign, because we're moving from an equilibrium, if you want, from a situation where there was corruption and it was tolerated, to a place slowly over time, obviously, where corruption is not going to be tolerated. And for that, you need heads to roll. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So you're seeing the signs of corruption being combated. So that's good. And there's no evidence of any sort of, graft or any sort of aid that we're receiving in terms of it being misspent. Quite on the contrary, we've been very, very effective and very diligent in how we put aid to use.
Let me ask Alexandra Flipenko about that, joining us from Vilnius. Alexandra, on that question of corruption, do you think perhaps some of the private sector investors now are a little wary of doling out money because, at least historically, there has been evidence of corruption in Ukraine?
Oh, well, this is, I think, one of the signs of the Soviet Union. It's the Soviet past. This is why probably Ukraine had that problem previously, because this all comes from the Soviet situation. Or there's also a famous quote attributed to one Russian writer, Saltykov-Shchedrin, that if I fall asleep and wake up in 100 years and someone will ask me what is going on in Russia right now, I will answer, they drink and they steal. But he was talking about Russia, though, not Ukraine. Ukraine has its own political spectrum and its own situation. So the corruption is mainly associated with Russia. And I think that Alexei Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation really proved that Russian officials steal horrifically and how they do it. But of course, since the Ukraine still has a hard time, previously, I think mostly before 2014 and especially before 2022, had a hard time coming out of this horrible, huge shadow of Russia and Soviet Union, mostly. They also have this veil of the idea of corruption, that corruption is everywhere in Ukraine, and it goes from top to bottom and bottom to top. But now the situation is very much different. This is why I think President Putin is so angry at Ukraine and Ukrainians. He's been angry at them from 2008, from 2014, from those times, because Ukraine wants to choose another path, and corruption is one of the things that Ukraine is trying slowly but surely to get rid of. And because President Putin knows very well that his people, his entourage, and everyone who surrounds him, they are only interested in money, and that you can buy and sell anything and everything in Russia, and the people too. So this is why I think President Putin wants everyone to believe that Ukraine is still as corrupt as the Soviet Union or Russia has been for all these years. But since I'm not in Ukraine, I cannot speak on this subject. I cannot be sure. But what I know from the sources that the situation is changing rapidly. But I'm sure that one of the reasons why European and American partners are maybe somehow worried about giving the more aid and more finances is because of that huge Soviet shadow and Russian shadow that is unfortunately still on Ukraine.
All right, Alexandra Flipenko, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts on that question of corruption as part of this conversation. But let's take you now to one of the many areas in Ukraine that does need reconstruction. This is the Kyiv commuter suburb of Irpin. It was the focus of Russian attention in the early days of the war. But now, over a year on, the head of the city council says it needs international help to rebuild.
Наш Ірпінь було зруйновано на 70%.
70% of the city was damaged, private houses and high-rise buildings, and also the schools and nurseries. But without the local and national government, rebuilding will go faster because it's so bureaucratic there.
Alexander Rodnyansk is still with us. He's an economic advisor to Vladimir Zelensky. And sir, I want to pick up on what we heard in that comment from Irpin, a representative there from the local council saying that we need far more international support. We need more money now. Yet Zelensky in London today sort of painting a far broader picture, talking about the idea that Ukraine could become a supplier of clean electricity, green hydrogen in the years ahead. Given the pressing needs in places like Irpin right now, is that really the priority of the Ukrainian government? Should it be the priority?
Well, you have to distinguish among many priorities. And our government has been very clear. There's actually, when it comes to recovery and reconstruction, there's the dimension of what's pressing, short term, medium term to long term. So in terms of the short term recovery, what we call the fast recovery, that's actually been ongoing since last year. And that's exactly what places like Irpin need and what they've been getting slowly. Much of that city has actually been already rebuilt, and the work is ongoing. So that's a separate priority, and that's a lot of the budget is actually devoted to that as well. Some international donors are helping, some private sector firms are involved too. Now, that's one part. The other part, of course, that you mentioned is the medium to long-term strategy, and that's where all these other industrial policies come in. And you can debate, whether they're useful or less useful, whether there's different ways to support an industry from developing, whether we should do it in the first place or not. But that's exactly what this discussion is about. So these are two different things, and they're not in direct competition with one another.
And Georges Kuzmaniov, here with me in Paris. This is all happening at a rather important moment, isn't it? Because obviously the counteroffensive is going on right now. We're about 2 weeks into that. And the European Union, the UK, the United States, pouring in money, weapons to Ukraine, but they're going to want to see results from that on the battlefield. From what you're seeing so far, how do you think the counteroffensive is playing out?
It's not working very well for now.
Why do you say that?
Well, a lot of losses in vehicles, tanks, and soldiers on the Ukrainian side, and the front line is not moving much. But Ukraine has still a lot of reserve, a lot of tanks, and depend how the next phase of the counteroffensive will be launched. But for now, the Russians are holding the positions, and when we speak about reconstruction, once again, we need to end the war. But most of the destructions are in the areas that have been conquered by the Russians. So you have to first, anyway, to reconquer them in order to rebuild. Yeah, and right now, it's not going very well.
Alexander Flipenko, I wonder if you agree with that. Do you think the counteroffensive isn't going very well, or is it really just sort of too early for us to really know because we're only about 10 days into this major counteroffensive?
Well, since I'm not a war specialist, it's difficult for me to say, but I can judge from what I see in the Russian press and Russian sources that President Putin and Sergei Shoigu, the head of Ministry of Defense, they, for past few weeks, they stopped glossing over the course of the war in Ukraine. And when in fall 2022, Ukrainian army liberated large parts of Kharkov and Kherson regions, the Russian authorities, they didn't comment on it at all. And now the situation has changed. Putin now frequently goes on camera, he discusses the situation on the front, and what does it tell us? It makes it clear that Putin expresses his personal opinion, and he takes only now I think, he takes personal responsibility for the outcome. And if Putin feared the imminent collapse of Russian army now, it's unlikely that he would have appeared before the cameras. And Sergei Shoigu is also talking publicly about the progress of Ukraine. He denies any Ukrainian success, of course, but he acknowledges the increased attacks. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner Group, he speaks frequently about Ukrainian counteroffensive, and according to him, huge territories are given to Ukraine right now. So now something is changing. They at least, Putin and Shoigu at least stopped glossing over the course of the counteroffensive, and Yevgeny Prigozhin is quite open, saying that the counteroffensive is going quite well for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian side. But again, I think that the fact that Putin is appearing before the cameras and speaking about it now, and I think it shows that he doesn't think that Russian army would collapse soon, or that something will change drastically from the Russian side. But again, I'm not a military expert.
Well, you mentioned Vladimir Putin several times. He's been speaking about this today, actually. Let's have a listen to what Vladimir Putin said a short while ago.
As I've already said, as is well known, the Ukrainian armed forces started on June 4th using their strategic reserves. Oddly enough, currently we're seeing a certain lull. It has to do with the fact that the enemy is suffering serious losses.
And Alexandra Rodnyansk in London, I do appreciate you're an economic advisor to the Ukrainian president, but I wonder if I could just get your reaction to Vladimir's comments there that there's been some kind of lull in the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
Yes, exactly. And without giving much away, obviously, we're all, sitting in different cities far away from the front lines. So I think that's, I appreciate these honest comments. But I will say this. Look, first of all, you can't compare the current counteroffensive to what was going on last year. Last year, we had the surprise effect when we were moving into around Kharkiv to liberate these areas, and also in Kherson. The Russians didn't expect it. They didn't have time to prepare. This time around, however, they had plenty of time to prepare. More than half a year, they were building up, very deep defense lines around those areas. So there's no way you could have expected us to move at the same speed. We wish we were moving faster, but it is what it is. At the same time, I will also say there's been a lot of discussion in Western media and in political circles all this time, whether we should be getting one form of weapon supplies or another form, whether we should be getting fighter jets or not. Well, look, we haven't been getting fighter jets fast enough, so there shouldn't be any questions about why the counteroffensive is proceeding at a speed that we're seeing and not any faster. Our troops are obviously exposed to Russian attacks from the air, and we can't really respond to that effectively. So, of course, we're having potentially more losses because of that. And, of course, the counteroffensive cannot proceed at the same pace as it would have if we had every single instrument there is. Now, that's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. At the same time, we do have successes, right? And we do recognize, everyone who looks at the situation, including the Russian side, recognize that there is some successes. Now, it's no surprise that the Russian side will always exaggerate the losses that we have. Truth is, they're not as large as they make them seem. And at the same time, it is a war. So, look, I won't comment about all the details, but we're pressing ahead. We're working on what we're supposed to be working, which is liberating Ukraine, and we're not backing down because we really have no option.
And George Kuzmanovic, I know you wanted to come in on that. Your thoughts on what you just heard, that, you know, Russia doesn't have a track record of being particularly clear-eyed about what's happening in Ukraine in the past. So why should we believe Vladimir Putin today when he says there's a lull in the fighting on the front?
Well, I read the United States medias and papers, and they're quite worried. New York Times, Washington Post, about the Ukrainian losses. It's not only on the Russian medias. And as Mr. Alexander said it, the counteroffensive in the last spring, it was against 100,000, 150,000 Russian soldiers. Now they're 500,000. There are far more tanks, artillery, and we know that there is a lack of ammunition in comparison to the Russian army. And above all, as I said here in another debate, this offensive is going without or almost without Ukrainian air support, which is something very hard and very costly in soldiers' lives. And the Russian, they have strong air support. So, yeah, it's not so easy.
And another development we're watching today as part of this story is Vladimir Putin's comments on nuclear weaponry. He said today that, and I'm quoting, a new generation of intercontinental ballistic missiles would soon be deployed. Alexandra Flipenko, you mentioned nuclear activities at the beginning of the programme, particularly based where you are in Lithuania. Just tell us your thoughts on what Vladimir Putin said about that in the context of the counteroffensive. Is he bluffing? Because he said this kind of thing before, hasn't he?
Yes, one of the first things that we should remember is that President Putin's past is in the KGB. So, of course, he doesn't say anything accidentally. That's out of the question. And, of course, Russian media would never, ever report anything that is not that doesn't go with the Kremlin view of the world. And I think that the bitter joke here in Lithuania is that the amount of theft in the Ministry of Defense of Russia helped the Ukrainian army somehow, because the Russian army was not prepared, and Ukrainian army appeared much stronger than Russia expected. But at the same time, it tells us whether those nuclear facilities that I'm 2 hours away from them here in Vilnius, and where the nuclear warheads will be stored soon, maybe there won't be actually any warheads. I'm talking with a lot of Belarusians who are here in Lithuania, who are living here in Lithuania as refugees after the attempted revolution of 2020, and all local Belarusians are sure that there will be just dummies delivered. But in any case, even though there are those dummies delivered to that nuclear facility in Belarus, still we have to be aware, and we have to be very careful, extremely careful with President Putin and with the Kremlin, because the processes that are happening inside Russia right now, they're similar somehow to those that took place in Germany in 1918, I think, when Kaiser abdicated. And I think that President Putin is fearful. He fears that his entourage will try to get rid of him if the situation goes from bad to worse. So in any case, even though a lot of people do not believe that there will be actually nuclear warheads in Minsk, by Minsk, right, very close to Minsk, but still we have to be very careful with the Kremlin and with President Putin, because he fears, he understands that the only place he can go if he loses the war is The Hague. So I think that we should be aware and we should follow what is happening. But I must say that here in Lithuania, a lot of people believe that there is not such, it's not such a big threat, those nuclear facilities by Minsk. But anyways, there are, of course, nuclear warheads in Russia.
And Alexandra Rodniansk, from your perspective at that economic conference in London today, do you draw a connection between Vladimir Putin making these comments now and the fact that so many world and business leaders are gathering in London to support Ukraine?
Well, look, there's always some connection between what they're saying. Ultimately, what I wanted to say before is they always lie. Look, when it comes to, for example, our losses again, they've said recently, the Russian dictator said in some conference that he was presenting, he mentioned that they destroyed 5 Patriot systems. Well, in fact, we only had 2 that were delivered to Kiev. And then he mentioned that he destroyed hundreds of tanks. Look, we didn't even have these hundreds of tanks that were delivered. So it's all complete lie. It's a farce. It's nothing than a show and a wave of propaganda of unprecedented proportions. So there's really nothing to comment. Now, of course, they're probably reacting to economic news as well, but I don't even think that they're doing the analytics and deciding whether they should respond to a conference in London or whether they should not respond to a conference in London. They're living in their own bubble where they're trying to convince their own people, their own electorate, their own power elites, if you want, and make sure that they are somehow clinging onto power without too much struggle. So that's the real risk for them. They know that they're not doing well. They know that they're losing the war. They know that Russia has no future with that sort of regime. And so they need to make sure, obviously, from their perspective, that they don't end up in a place that's really bad for them personally.
Well, let's put that then to George Kuzmanovic, who's with me. Do you agree then? Putin is fearful. He is, according to our guest there, lying and using propaganda to try and persuade his own people that he's winning the war. These nuclear comments are for a Russian audience, not for an international audience.
Really, I don't know who is in which bubble. During the first phase of war, Ukraine has 2,000 tanks from the Soviet time, plus those who have been given from Poland, from Slovakia, from Czechia, from all the countries that have T-72, T-80 tanks modified. Where are these tanks? They've been destroyed. But I remember many months before, they were saying, no, they are not losses. These tanks have not been destroyed. Obviously they are, because they're not used in this new offensive. On the other side, in this last week, you had in St. Petersburg this economic forum organized by Vladimir Putin with 130 countries. I mean...
Okay. Let me put this question to you very directly, though, because is Vladimir Putin afraid right now, and that's why he's talking about nuclear weapons?
No, he's talking about nuclear weapons because since 2012, both USA and Russia are deploying nuclear weapons and counter missiles in Europe. I mean, he already deployed the Iskander missiles in Kaliningrad, Königsberg, and it's not starting from now. It's already 11 years that, and that's a big international problem issue that we are. Both countries are pushing their nuclear weapons against the other country, and that's a big problem.
So when Putin sort of threatens to use them or suggests he might use them, you think he might? You don't think he's bluffing?
No, it's like during the Cold War. It's part of the nuclear threat. It's also what did the former British Prime Minister. She threatened Russia to use nuclear weapons. These things are happening often. And maybe, I don't know if Putin is afraid. I have no idea. But from his point of view, on the economic perspective, on the international perspective, things are going well. Maybe he's afraid of something happening in his own country, but I think it will be worse for us because those who may remove Putin from power are far more nationalistic and warmongers than Putin. And that's will be a big problem for us.
All right. Well, let's think about a little bit about what impact this may all be having in Russia. Let's bring in Alexandra Flipenko if we can. Alexandra, your thoughts on what we just heard and whether you think the war feels closer to home now for Russians than it did before. I mean, there were apparently attempted drone attacks inside Russia today, and there have been several in the past month.
Well, to my mind, if we are talking about this, well, let's say this fantastic future that tomorrow or a day after tomorrow, the Ukrainian army expels Putin's army from Ukraine. And for example, Russian volunteer corps that is fighting for Ukraine entrenches itself in the Belgorod region. I suppose that the Russians in this situation, they will not fight a domestic war. They will not fight the great patriotic war, let's say. They won't go to die for Putin's right to continue sit on the throne, for Putin personally. Of course, although understandably they are now going at the front because of the propaganda, because mobilization in the Russian army, it's an opportunity, big opportunity to make money, and Russian regions are very, very poor. But again, as I've already said, thanks to the facts from the Navalny Anti-Corruption Foundation investigations, a lot of people know that Putin's entourage and Putin personally are stealing quite a lot of money. And probably in this situation, if a Ukrainian army expels Putin's army from Ukraine, and for example, Russian volunteer corps is in Belgorod, I don't think that people will go to die for Putin personally. And if we imagine this situation, this Russian volunteer corps can become actually a game changer and a player on the international arena, and they can somehow start this new Russia, let's say, on the contrary to Putin's Russia. But this, of course, even since I'm thinking about it, and a lot of Russian political analysts are thinking about it right now, I think this feels that the war is coming close to home. And of course, Putin probably also somehow understands it, because since again, I'm not a military expert, I don't know actual numbers, I'm not at the front, but what I see is that it seems that President Putin has adopted the old Olympic slogan, faster, higher, stronger, and his reports on successes at the front are becoming cheerful and are becoming much more optimistic, and it seems that he is somehow losing solidity, and this is the main quality that a politician must have in a dictatorship. So such boasting looks are somehow, well, there's a lack of some ground in it. It seems it's something like exaggeration. I don't want to use the word hysteria, but it seems that it's too cheerful right now. So I think that for Putin and for the Kremlin, they are feeling that the war is coming close to home, and that the situation is quite difficult. And I think it's not an accident that Yevgeny Prigozhin is somehow the voice of that deep Russia, let's say. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner Group, and he is expressing those fears, and he is saying that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is going very successfully. So those signs are, I believe they show that there is some kind of, maybe not fear, but at least some understanding that the situation is not as good as they are trying to present it.
Alexandra Filipenko talking to us there from Vilnius, Lithuania. Alexandra Rodnians talking to us from London, an economic advisor to President Zelensky. Thanks to you both. And George Kuzmanovic here in the studio. Thank you as well, sir, for coming in to talk to us. Unfortunately, we're out of time here on the France 24 debate, but do stay with us on France 24. Much more world news and analysis coming up after a short break. Bye for now.